Essex had been fascinated with the theories of Charles Darwin, in particular the groundbreaking work assembled in his Origin of Species.
And therefore I am convinced that natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of species modification. I open the floor for questions.
Mr. Darwin, while your theory may explain diversity in the lower animals, how can your natural selection account for the human soul? Were we not created in God's own image?
I have not, as yet, applied my observations to mankind, though I may do so at some future point.
But Mr. Darwin, shouldn't natural selection operate within any naturally occurring population, be it animal, vegetable, or man himself?
Yes, quite right.
And, given that we have removed ourselves from the mechanisms of natural selection, isn't mankind overdue for the next evolutionary step?
No, not at all. Man is still in direct competition with his fellows, and thus subject to natural selection. Yes, you had a question.
Mr. Darwin, I am Dr. Nathaniel Essex.
A pleasure, Doctor.
Gentlemen, I wanted to speak to you about my own research. I have made detailed observations on mutated humans, incorporating some of your theories.
I must caution you, these are dangerous times for free-thinking men of science. I shall very much look forward to reading it when you publish it, sir.
But I have irrefutable evidence to back up my claims, and I'm sure with your support...
In light of the lukewarm reception my theories received here, sir, I believe it is I who am in need of your support.
Thank you, sir.
Be patient, my boy, and discreet.
I am from beyond. Listen, and all you desire will be yours. Welcome to Spider-Dan and the Secret Balls. Prepare for Prattle.
Unipod. Welcome to Prattle World. I am your host, the ever-amazing, ever-spectacular Spider-Dan, and in this podcast I spotlight entertainment's best-kept secrets that a mainstream audience may find boring. And welcome to another Puny Pod, a short-form podcast where I visit a specific film or comic book all by myself. Yes, surprise, I'm doing something extra since you guys have been so wonderfully patient, and I was again kind of inspired after reading The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix to carry it on. This is the further adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. So it does have some ties to the previous miniseries that will be out on Friday. And yes, it is a follow-up. It is not the same writers. It is not the same artists. But it does have some connections here and there. It does feature Cyclops. It does feature Jean Grey. It does feature Clan Ascani again, and it does feature Apocalypse, and it does feed into this Darwinian thing that we're going and looking at throughout these 3 books that we've discussed with Apocalypse, and that Darwinian idea and what his modus operandi is and things. So let me tell you who wrote it and who draws it first. So it is written by Peter Milligan with art by Jean-Paul Léon. I said Jean like it was French, but it's not. It's just John, not Jean. And it involves Jean and Cyclops being pulled in time by a member of Clan Ascani called Sanctity. And this time they only have 48 hours because they are in their own bodies. So they're not going for 9 years or however long they were in the previous miniseries. So it does have some connective tissue there, and there's a reason for this. There's a reason that Clan Ascani have sent them, but it's not abundantly clear from the get-go. But before we get them, they don't even turn up until the end of the first issue, and it's their book. But is it their book? Is it really their book? So it's 1859, Victorian London, mid-Victorian London, I believe, if I'm getting my history right. I'm not very good at that sort of stuff. But yes, Queen Victoria is in her reign at the moment. I don't think she's particularly old, so I guess it's within that time frame. So we are introduced to a scientist called Nathaniel Essex, who is a contemporary of Charles Darwin and very much believes in his theories. And if anything, is taking those theories even further. Before we were introduced to him, we were introduced to his wife Rebecca, who is in the rain and digging a grave, basically, well, digging up a grave, I should say, of her young deceased son, Adam. And during this, it's kind of, we flash back to a month earlier, but during this, while she's digging trying to exhume the body, we see Apocalypse himself stood behind her menacingly in this big rainy thunderstorm. Very dramatic, very gothic, very, Frankensteinian. There's a lot. They're playing with a lot of these wonderful kind of ideas and previous kind of stories. They're having a lot of fun with that. So yes, Nathaniel Essex, a great scientist, loves his wife Rebecca dearly, but since the death of their son Adam, which has been, I think, about 2 years previous to this, he's become less loving, less caring. He's questioning his own morality and what use it is in his quest for science, and he's inspired and driven on by Adam dying. It's never said how Adam died or for what reason. Is it a genetic ailment? We don't know. But yeah, it's implied that it's some sort of disease that the science of 1859 could not solve, could not cure, and he's kind of driven to explore these ideas that Darwin has posited to their utmost. But he's given up believing in God. He thinks, but he believes that mutants will ascend, and because of this, he has to go to the Royal Society and kind of fight for his place among them, among Darwin and their contemporaries. And he posits that the Essex factor, which is the X factor in the mutant genes, will come about and will cause great changes, great shifts in the, much like Xavier's speech at the beginning of each X-Men film when they do it, or not even Xavier, but, whoever does that kind of leaps forward, every few years, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So it's very much in line with that. And he's put together this kind of body with animal parts and human parts to kind of give an idea. And it's this huge hulking mutant character with wings as well, not unlike Angel, but again a very much more of a kind of monstrous, huge hulking figure. And he's trying to impart his knowledge and inspire them, and everybody is in the Royal Society is disgusted. It's a real body, it's real body parts, real animal parts, and he's like, Darwin, don't you agree with me? Don't you believe me? And he's like, I think you're a sick man. I would go see a physician. I've lost a child. I know what it's like. I know what it can do to you, but you're turning into a monster. Don't let yourself become a monster. And he's like, if I have to become a monster, I will. So he storms out, and yeah, he's disturbs everyone and shows that he's just, not the nicest of guys, but you'd understand where it's coming from. You understand the bitterness and the twistedness and the fact that he wants to rid himself of feelings to better pursue in the pursuit of science. And again, everyone's saying, but yes, you need to have a moral backbone. You need to believe in something, or what is it all for? We need to question things. But yeah, so he goes into a local pub and he's approached by a man called Cootie Tremble, who's, again, he's kind of, kind of a Artful Dodger type character, but like a more despicable and dodgy one, kind of, he'd grave rob. You could imagine him grave robbing, but what he does do, because Nathaniel Essex turns away a prostitute, he has a collection of curiosities. So, for lack of a better word, he has a freak show. So, people who have mental illnesses, physical ailments, disfigurements, you name it. Whatever is the politically correct term for it, use those. But yeah, so he takes him, and it's somewhere in the sewer, and he shows them, and they go to kill him because he's like, take me away, I've seen enough, I paid you, I've seen enough. But then this group of marauders, he says, why don't I hire you and bring these poor unfortunate souls to his house, Milbury House, for study. And this causes Rebecca, who is again pregnant and struggling, having a very difficult pregnancy again. With her next child, she's growing suspicious of Essex. He again grows paler every day. The marauders even cut Essex, and he doesn't really bleed, almost like perhaps he's already a mutant himself, or that he's less human than he used to be. He's not. He's shown to not be eating either. So again, we're getting a lot of these kind of mad scientist kind of tropes, which I love, and again, tying it into that kind of gothic horror is brilliant. I really, really like this book. I forgot kind of quite how good it was. Again, I didn't remember enjoying the Rise of Apocalypse too much, and that is still the truth. But I didn't remember how much I enjoyed that first Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, and then this one I think might be the best one for me, because it just, again, plays all that rich kind of Victorian Gothic kind of horror elements. The classic Frankensteinian, Dr. Moreau, there's all that kind of stuff being played with here. And yes, within a wonderful kind of modern take on it with, again, the influx of the X-Men influence. So the Marauders are also kind of digging around their tunnels, and they discover an ancient cavern where Apocalypse resides, and he's awoken. He's finally awoken. He believes this to be the right time for his ascendancy, and he kills the guys, and then he goes out into London. He doesn't disguise himself. His design is really different. He's long and lanky and very cybernetic, almost like a giant, Sphinx-like creature almost. I really dig the design. It's something, because usually he's shown to be quite bulky and big, but in this he's kind of more long and spindly, which I quite enjoy, almost like a snake a little bit, which I quite like, the kind of references and stuff. So I think this was written, if I'm right, before the Rise of Apocalypse. So there is a moment in this which I believe they hark back to in Rise of Apocalypse. So he's flashing back to being a slave, and he's putting together the pyramids, and again his powers kind of initiate, and he flies, and this big kind of energy ball he becomes. We see that in this book. It's slightly depicted a bit differently. He's not got grey skin or blue lips, but it's effectively the same thing. And it's about, like, Set speaks to him, or he speaks to Set, or he believes it's the gods communing with him. And he looks at the world and sees how far we've come and how far we've advanced as society, and he is interested in everything, and wants to learn how to better control and destroy the world and make it in his own image, for survival of the fittest, blah, 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 which again is a nice kind of segue into this kind of Darwinist idea. And it kind of, he already believes in that. So they kind of twist, Sinister is twisting that idea. Apocalypse is twisting that idea as well, for both for their own means. And that is what Darwin says a little later in the book. He basically says, yeah, these ideas are not basically bad, but some people will twist them for their own means, which is standard, isn't it, really? So the Marauders find Apocalypse again, and they attack him, and he kills one and says, and they say that Essex will pay a lot for him, and Apocalypse is interested because he's like, what does he mean? Why is he looking for people like me? So he says, I know what being a slave is like, so I'm going to make you my slaves. I know how useful they can be. And yeah, so Rebecca, while hearing screams nightly from Essex's annex, she goes to visit, and she finds, again, she's never betrayed him, never, investigated too far, never gone into his lab or anything like that. But tonight she does, and she finds a a baby there in some kind of liquid, in kind of a jar or a container of some kind being preserved. And she makes the assumption that it is her son Adam, and that's why we flash forward, flash back, whichever, to the point where she's digging up the grave and she finds out that it is Adam. And yeah, this is a dark book, guys. Infanticide, or not infanticide really, because he didn't kill the baby, but doing weird stuff and experiments to it is still pretty fucked up. And yeah, Apocalypse arrives at this point while Essex is trying to console her and explain what he's done and why he's done it. And Apocalypse arrives and offers for a partnership, offers to his help and his support and in what Essex is doing at this point. Scott and Jean arrive nude. One arrives at a church, and Jean arrives in the church, Scott arrives in the sewer. So moving on to issue 2, Sanctity again explains that she's brought Scott and Jean here for a reason. They've got 48 hours, and they must stop Apocalypse Ascendancy from occurring now, because it will damage and affect the timeline. Things will not occur as planned in the timeline. So they must go to Milbury House and stop Apocalypse however they can. Rebecca confronts Essex about the heinous things he's been doing and tries to reach out to him, but Apocalypse is more interested in seeing his work. And again, Essex is more than happy to talk about his work to somebody as interesting. And again, Apocalypse has now disguised himself as a kind of African prince, so it's not as kind of monstrous or scary, but he's, very kind of lavishly, he's a huge kind of royal gown and hat and everything. Looks great. It's a really good look for Apocalypse. And he finally realizes who he is and what he needs to do. He understands finally that he is a mutant and he's the sign of things to come, this great mutation, as Essex calls it. So they decide to journey over to the Hellfire Club, where they meet the ancestors of Captain Britain and Sebastian Shaw. And basically Apocalypse is there, and everyone thinks he's an absolute madman, only for Apocalypse to reveal himself and to prove he is what he says he is. And Essex even is doubting him. He's like, "Oh, I'm going along with this madman. It's stupid. I apologize, gentlemen." And that's what kicks kind of Apocalypse into overdrive. He's like, "You call me a madman, I'll show you what I truly am and what authority I have," which is awesome as well. He kills one of the Hellfire Club. I don't think it's anyone I mentioned already, but he kills somebody. So Scott and Jean attempt to reunite using their psychic rapport, but Scott says he's got to stay down in the sewer, and there must be a reason why he was dumped there. And he is again in the sewer. All of these kind of unfortunate souls again. People who have physical ailments, mental ailments and stuff, they're kind of attacking him, and he's trying his best to keep them at bay with his optic blasts, but it blinds him, obviously, every time he closes his eyes. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. But yeah, he's struggling down there in the dark, basically. And Jean manages to reach Milbury House, only to find Rebecca reburying Adam. And Jean tries to relate what Essex is going through with the loss of his son to what happened to Jean and Scott themselves when they had to give up Nathan to Ascani into the future to cure the techno-organic virus. And they go in and they find in the annex, they find, more horrors, children in cages, including a mute boy called Danny that Jean, with her psychic abilities, allows him now to speak to her and communicate where they've gone. And it's the Hellfire Club, and she communicates that to Scott. Scott uses his optic blast to escape the sewers and the other curiosities, and forces one of the marauders to take him to the Hellfire Club. And again, Apocalypse talks about who he is, what he is, and again, kills one of the members. And then just as they're leaving, Scott and Jean arrive to see Apocalypse and Essex leave the club, and they recognize Essex as Mr. Sinister, one of their worst and deadliest enemies, and somebody who will greatly affect Scott and his family and his upbringing, and Jean as well, and again Madeline Pryor and all the stuff as well, as we know. Doesn't give Nathan the techno-organic virus like in X-Men 97, but he did all the other stuff in the comics. So yes, and then they're attacked by Apocalypse and Sinister's mutates. Very rough and ready and kind of gross and disgusting and cybernetic. And yeah, just very, very not very clean work by Apocalypse. He is a brute. He is an absolute brute. And it's a means to an end for him to do this. So they capture Scott and teleport away. And Essex finds Jean helpless in the river. Moving on to issue 3, Jean tries to best to convince Essex not to accept Apocalypse's offer. And then Oscar, the marauder that helped Scott escape the sewers, they are attacked by Cootie Tremble, who again was the guy earlier who was the leader of the marauders, and he's now a cyborg mutate created by Apocalypse. While Jean and Oscar are being attacked, Essex runs away. Apocalypse is torturing and testing Scott with his techno-organic technology, which eventually develops into a ruby quartz helmet to stop his optic blast. Now, in the comics, Mr. Sinister, the original origin was supposed to be that he was a child that didn't age. That was his mutant ability. He was an adult, but he was in a child's body, which again is kind of interesting and a bit kind of messed up. And he was like a contemporary of Scott in the orphanage. And he used a robot Mr. Sinister character to enact all of his plans and to intimidate other villains into joining him and various other things, because he felt that a child is not a regular looking child would not be intimidating enough. This origin is basically what Chris Claremont intended, and he did get round to it in X-Men Forever X-Men Forever 2, the second miniseries he did. So if you want to read that version of the character and that origin, you can do. I kind of prefer this one. There's a lot more kind of to play with. I don't know where else you can kind of go with that. It kind of makes sense in a way, because the character is obviously, he looks like a vampire. He's like, clear as day, just, evil, like he looks evil. He's pure evil. It's what a child would dream up as a nightmare, a nightmarish character. So that makes sense. And the name is a bit silly as well, so it kind of makes sense. Obviously he's a child who's an adult, but you know what I mean. But yeah, that was the original idea until this story came along and completely changed it, and was the inspiration for an X-Men episode, one of the last episodes, called Descent. It doesn't play out exactly like this, but there are a lot of similarities there for you to enjoy. So yeah, and again in the comics, Mr. Sinister is allergic to Scott's optic blast, so he develops the ruby quartz and gives him glasses, so he can get away with not being killed, and he can have glasses and he can walk around and live his life as normal. So again, that's not an Xavier thing, that was a Mr. Sinister thing, which is interesting. So I don't know if maybe the technology or him speaking to Apocalypse, he got the idea from that and knew about that. But it's interesting. It was just a nice little thing I noticed. But so he's torturing him, and then Essex finds his wife has released all the curiosities. So Danny, the little orphan boy who couldn't speak, who was mute, is now he can just speak. They're all being free. They're all running away from Milbury House. And then he goes in, he's like, I'm going to change my ways. I'm a different man. I know what I've done. I'm wrong. I'm bad. I please forgive me. I'm worse than dirt. And she basically says, I will not forgive you for what you've done. You've experimented on my baby. You've caused me to miscarry this one. And now I'm dying. The only thing I can describe you as is Sinister. And now that she's dead, he goes to destroy his family gravesite, his family cemetery, because he blames everything he is to his genetic, ancestors. Their trials and tribulations have made him become who he is. That genetic memory, that genetic trauma, whatever you want to call it, he blames on them, and he goes to kill himself with a little musket pistol type thing. But he doesn't. Apocalypse visits the Hellfire Club again and tells them to stoke the fires of war and hatred, and we see images of World War I and World War II, until he's perfected a way of killing the majority of the world with a disease, a pestilence, as he calls it. And apparently Essex is developing it for him, and as a way to control as well the emergence of more powerful mutants than Apocalypse. So again, that kind of hypocrisy is coming in there. So he goes, I don't, survival of the fittest, but if anyone's more powerful than me, they're going to get murdered, or they're going to be, I'm going to genetically tell them not to be as powerful. We'll get Essex to do that. So there is that. And they're just waiting on his word. He says he doesn't want to be a vanguard. He wants to sit in the shadows, and he doesn't want to be a martyr, I think he describes it, or something like that. So Jean then attempts to save Scott with Oscar's help, and is captured, but Oscar manages to escape, journeys to the sewers, and asks for help from Danny and the other curiosities that Jean and Rebecca had already freed, which they agree. Essex storms into Darwin's house and tells him all his theories were true. He's seen it, but that they together have killed the old gods, and that the new gods shall be cruel. And again, Essex goes off and he says, I'm going to leave the future to you, Darwin. I will leave this future, as terrible as it is, to you, implying that he's going to kill himself again. And then Essex returns to find Scott and Jean have been captured, and finds them extremely fascinating, and they seem to know him, they seem to have an idea of him, or seem to hate him as well, and that Jean described Scott as being a man who went through a similar thing as Sinister. He can relate, but he didn't let it twist him and turn him into something he isn't. And that's what kind of fascinates Sinister. What makes you so special? How did you manage to do that when I couldn't? And at this point, Essex accepts Apocalypse's offer to rid him of that morality, to rid him of love and caring, and again, give him that knowledge and the power to live long and be patient and take time with his science and perfect it. And he says, you must take a new name. And of course, he decides to take the name that Rebecca called him on her deathbed, Sinister. And then at this point, Apocalypse leaves before the transformation is completed, because he's going to kill Queen Victoria and her partner. I don't know history, so I don't know his name, but yes, he's going to Buckingham Palace. He's going to kill the Queen. So Oscar returns with the other mutants, and they manage to free Scott and Jean, or distract the techno-organic machinery enough that they can release themselves, only for Sinister to emerge from his transformation, his metamorphosis. So Scott attempts to kill Sinister immediately, but he can't bring himself to do it, for all the things he will eventually do. How can I judge a man when he hasn't done these things yet? And then after a quick battle, Apocalypse own basically technology, the techno-organic ship or base, saves Sinister from a head-on kind of confrontation with them, because he's weak from the transformation. He's not quite at full strength, but he leaves to work on Apocalypse's own pestilence. But while looking at the music box he has with Rebecca's photo in, just to determine whether he is free of that morality and emotion, he does question whether this is a new form of slavery, being, enslaved to Apocalypse, as opposed to his morality and his emotions and his wife. He now is a slave of a different kind. Oscar and Danny are attacked by Cootie, who is now dying due to the apocalypse's rough handiwork in mutating him, and Jean tries to cut off his pain centers, kind of out of pity, but Sinister kills him instead because, why not just kill him? And Jean tries to reach out to Essex, and she mentions the future of children. Apocalypse is going to do something horrible and horrific. Why don't you think of the generations of children? And he says you might want to go to Buckingham Palace if you want to stop Apocalypse. And they arrive just in time to stop Apocalypse from blasting Queen Victoria, but suddenly he falls ill. Sinister appears and they teleport back to his stronghold. So they have won, effectively. And they very shortly travel back in time because their mission is complete. They have stopped Apocalypse from his mission from ascending earlier than he should in the timeline. And Apocalypse then questions Sinister about the plague because he was like, where is it? Why didn't it affect everybody? What did you do? And Sinister tries to lie to him, and he sees right through it and strangles him. And he says, okay, I did betray you, but the reason I did it is I reprogrammed the virus to only affect the pestilence, to only affect you and nobody else. And he says if he had done it, it would have corrupted the mutant genome, ensuring his theorized great mutation would be polluted and bastardized. Apocalypse is irritated by this, but he allows Sinister to live as it shows him he is strong. His survival has been determined by being one of the fittest, and he showed the strength because he did betray him. He did think otherwise. He then teleports away to recuperate and promises that if he is going to see the Great Mutation, as he describes it, Apocalypse will be the one who decides. And then again, Sanctity reveals that the mission of Jean and Scott was actually to ensure Sinister became who he was meant to become, to ensure that the timeline happens and everything that's already occurred will come to pass. And Scott wonders if it was worth the cost of one man's soul. Again, even his kind of, one of his worst villains, he still wonders and still shows empathy and cares. And again, all the while through this book, they both do. They both try their best to avoid that, but all the while it was kind of almost destined to be. So it needed to happen. And then Apocalypse, Sinister needs to, clone Madeline Pryor to have Cable, for him to get the organic virus, for him to go into the future, for him to become Cable, and to eventually kill Apocalypse, as we saw in the previous miniseries. So we see that, and we learn that Danny and Oscar have made their way to New York, and they, at the desk, when their name is asked, they take on the surname Summers, which Scott and Jean felt there was something more to their story, or more of a reason why they were there apart from Apocalypse and Sinister, and that is the one. So those are Scott Summers' ancestors, but neither of them ever knew. Yes, and then years later, Sinister appears at Darwin's funeral and leaves laughing at the irony of society evolving to accept his theories, and disregards the music box with Rebecca's photograph, finally accepting that Nathaniel Essex is truly dead. Well, what a book. What a book. I really enjoyed this one, guys. I think it's top tier. I think it's a great kind of origin story. It ties all these characters together in a rich and exciting kind of tapestry. You've got, mutant powers and time travel and, evil Victorian-esque, dark, disturbing Frankensteinian ideas. It's brilliant. And Peter Milligan, again, is he's from London originally. So again, we don't get all the cool, blimey, governor. You don't get all that bullshit in this book. It's just written as normal. You don't get all the kind of phonetics and shit that you sometimes get in other books. It's just like, no, these are the characters, this is how they speak, which I appreciated. It does have a level of sophistication, I think, to it, as well that maybe is lacking in a lot of X-Men books. And again, not that I don't mind a bit of sophistication, but there's kind of a rich history it's tapping into of not only Victorian history and lore and literature, but fiction as well. There's a lot to like here, and I think seeing the descent into kind of madness and all the kind of horrible things that Mr. Sinister will be capable of and is capable of, and including the mutant massacre. And it makes I think initially I was like, I don't see how this kind of works. I don't see how the two characters, Apocalypse and Sinister, I don't see how they work together and how they would be connected. But actually it makes more sense really that it's this in a way to some degree. Again, Descent, the animated version, is fine. I don't think it's not too dissimilar from this, and it's a fine take. I definitely prefer this over the child version of Mr. Sinister. That idea it has legs, but I don't know how long you could play with that or do that, or it would need to be somewhat more interesting than, oh, Mr. Sinister's actually a boy. Oh, great. Now what? Kind of thing. I don't know, but I've not read those issues, the X-Men Forever 2 issues, but yeah, go ahead, check it out, read up on it. But I think this is much better. This is much more fun. This is much more interesting. There's a lot more depth to it. I do like the kind of villain origin story. I think is always quite fun. Is always really interesting. I like the idea that he's not just, again, he's been presented in the past as being pure evil, and that's the idea because he looks like that. He's got a name like that, and again, the kind of the creation of that character makes sense. We see him in Inferno and all the other things that he does and did, and in the in connection with everything else, it makes sense. So, but yeah, I think it's a really good book. I think the art is fun. It's different. It's kind of very Alex Mayleaf. If you've read kind of Daredevil, it's got that kind of almost feel to it, but it's a bit more kind of colourful, I think. And yeah, there's some panels I don't particularly know what's happening. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but I think it's just part of that stylization. But it worked for me. I don't. It's nowhere near as bad as the artwork in Rise of Apocalypse. There is something here definitely to enjoy, and his depiction of these characters, John Paul Leon, I think is really, really good and really different. And the way he kind of frames everything is very unique, and there is a lot going on, and it might not be for everyone's taste, the artwork, but I dug it, and I think the story is strong as well. I really think it's a good mix of all these elements, and again, it's not too much of anything. It's kind of just right. It's a real good balancing out, like the previous miniseries that I talked about. There's a lot here to enjoy and to have fun with. If you like a good dark origin of a villain, I think this is good, because again, nobody just starts off evil. Nobody begins evil. How do they get to that point? What drives them? When did they, what did they start off trying to accomplish? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So what drove them to be who they are and what they are? So yeah, really, really good, really fun, just solid. Absolutely, couldn't recommend it more. If you're looking for that story, again, it's if you want to watch the Descent episode, again, very different, but there are a lot of similarities to it. You won't be seeing any dead babies in it, but the ideas are effectively there and effectively the same. So yeah, and it's a great character to play with and have fun with. Yeah, thank you again, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this as well. well. I think it's a really, really good book. So you can get this again as part of that collection that I linked in the previous podcast. You can, it's with with both miniseries. You can get, I think it's Past and Present or something like that, Scott. X-Men, Cyclops and Phoenix, Past and Present. So that would be the first miniseries and the second miniseries. So the Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix and the Further Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. Again, both really, really solid books. Again, I can't remember the Ascani Sun one, and I haven't read that Phoenix one, so I don't know about the quality of that. But these two miniseries, if you want to get these two, again, quite heavily connected still, even though they are quite different stories and separate stories, there's still a lot of connective tissue where it's effectively a sequel as well. So yeah, check it out. So really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, I remember kind of not enjoying it as much, but on this read, I really got into it, and I was kind of inspired again by reading the other miniseries. I was like, this one was really good. Is the other one really good? Yes, it is really good. Probably arguably better as well. But again, lots of fun. Check it out. I might release this maybe next year, maybe when season 2 comes out, X-Men 97. I think that would be a nice kind of public one for people to enjoy. But this is for now for you guys on Patreon only. So yeah, definitely check out this comic. I do highly, highly recommend it. All right, thanks again, guys, and thanks again for being patient with me. I wanted to throw out a few of these I wanted to throw out an extra one because I wanted to read the book, and I thought it all sort of ties in to this August ellipse, as I'm calling it. And yeah, you guys have been so patient and kind and considerate with me and me not delivering as much as I'd like to. I'm trying. I'm really, really pushing myself. And again, you will get stuff. I just sometimes want to deliver more than I can, or what, I want to, and I've got plans. There's another poll up if you haven't voted yet. Get on there, vote for the next one. But I'll do the Cartoon Network one next, definitely 100%. That is coming next. I don't know if I'm going to do it in the form of a video because I want to experiment with some video editing software, and maybe I'll do it as a video, but I'll still bring up the audio as well, just for you guys. If I'll put it out as audio, and you can make your choice. You can either watch it as a video, or you can do it as audio, whichever you want. I don't mind. You decide. But thank you again. This has been great. Really enjoyed this book. Highly recommend. If anything of that sounds up your alley, but yeah, go for it. I'd say. I think a couple of the patrons here, I feel you like your gothic kind of horror stuff. So this is definitely up that alley. So yeah, check it out. All right, guys. Love you. Take care. And as always, prepare for prattle.